Every time you used to fill up your tank of gas, a few cents of every dollar spent would trickle down to a country many couldn't find on a map: Venezuela. In fact, almost every aspect of your life in some way, shape, or form has been dominated by Venezuelan petroleum. The asphalt used to build highways, the rubber for your tires, the plastic in your computer, your shoes, TV, shampoo, smartphone, furniture, and the list goes on. And it's specifically that fact that Venezuela now possesses the strangest economy on earth. In some aspects, Venezuela and its population seem to defy economic logic and reasoning. That same $50 tank of gas is essentially given for free to Venezuelans. The people that inhabit the many sprawling slums around the capital Caracas can't find basic necessities like food, toilet paper, and shoes, yet they all have DirecTV, and they even take out loans to give their teenage daughters cosmetic surgery. In 2010, a Venezuelan could fly to Paris, exchange some currency, then come back with 7 years worth of minimum wage salary. People rarely save money, choosing to spend it as soon as they get it. The many glitzy hotels can either be the most expensive in the world or the cheapest, depending on how you exchange your money. It has the world's largest proven oil reserves, yet in 2017, the average citizen lost 8.7 kilograms of weight due to food shortages. It produces almost nothing that it consumes, as nearly everything of importance is imported. To top it all off, Venezuela was the 4th richest country on earth, richer than the United Kingdom, yet is now the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere. The incredibly rich, strange, and atrocious economic story of Venezuela has but a single root cause: its vast supply of crude oil and its corrupting effect on those in power. This is the story of Venezuela, the strangest economy on earth and the worst economic disaster of any economy in modern history. This video is sponsored by Blinkist, an app that condenses the key insights from nonfiction books that you can read or listen to in just 15 minutes. With over 5,000 titles to choose from, you can understand powerful ideas from economics, history, personal development, and much more. While making this video, I utilized Blinkist's vast catalog to help me research this topic, specifically how democracies die, us versus them, and why nations fail. The latter was particularly influential in developing my ideas on how political institutions, in combination with critical moments in history, ultimately shape and form the prosperity of modern economies. By joining Blinkist, you can supplement and expand on topics talked about on this channel and gain powerful insights into the topics you love and care about. Right now, Blinkist has a special offer just for my audience. Click the link in my description to start your free 7-day trial with Blinkist and get 25% off a premium membership. On July 31st, 1914, life in Venezuela was changed forever. Erupting from a 400-foot deep hole in the ground, rained a thick, black, viscous liquid from its first commercial oil well. At this time, Venezuela was just a backwater, obscure Andean country ruled by the strongman Juan Vicente Gomez, a man that never let an opportunity pass him by. He rose to power in 1908 when, as vice president, he forcefully took the office, while the president, Castro, was in Paris being treated for his syphilis. From then on until his death, he would act as dictator. The eventual discovery of an ocean of oil before him was just another opportunity to gain power. Lacking the capital, knowledge, and skilled workers needed, Gomez allowed foreign companies to explore, drill, and extract Venezuelan oil with no taxes and no royalties so long as they propped up his dictatorship. He granted oil concessions, gave favors to those around him, and built a network of loyalists beholden to oil revenue. This made sure he maintained power while also obtaining a vast personal fortune. Over the next 21 years, Venezuela was no longer an obscure country. It was now the second largest producer of oil in the entire world. As such, it had already become addicted to oil money, as it supplied 2/3 of its government's income and 90% of its exports. While Gomez did feed himself and those loyal to him first, the average people of Venezuela got their first taste of what a dictator with oil money could do for them. The very first banks opened up, and the oil industry paid incredibly high wages, from which an economy of services could huddle around. Venezuelan farmers left their inherited ancestral lands to go to the cities and try and get their cut of the oil money. The timing was a perfect storm. As oil demand steadily rose in the 20th century, so did demand for the Venezuelan currency, the bolivar. This is crucially important for two reasons. First, it makes the cost to import foreign goods much cheaper, and second, it makes exporting goods more expensive. What this means is producers in Venezuela found they couldn't export anything, at the same time that consumers realized that buying foreign goods was the cheapest option. At the very same time, the world was experiencing the Great Depression. As such, the United States allowed the dollar to weaken against other currencies. In just a decade, the bolivar increased by 70%, making it one of the strongest currencies on the planet. For the very first time, Venezuelans started importing luxury goods, landing decent jobs, and having access to modern amenities. But the society was slipping into an overwhelming reliance on oil. By the late 1930s, all business costs, wages, and prices of goods were now linked to its overvalued currency. With a huge influx of people moving to the cities, the cost of living startled many, including Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who insisted the initial report he received on the matter be double-checked. In fact, by 1939, Caracas was now the most expensive place to live in the entire world. The city started to resemble a remote diamond mining town, which was ruled like a dictator's personal paradise. Gómez, by the time of his passing in 1935, had become one of the richest men in Latin America, owning giant swaths of land and maintaining monopolies in many industries, from paper to beef and dairy. He built the country's first army to defend his control, he cracked down on opposition, and gave the government power to take all state revenues. His passing accidentally made the Venezuelan government an entrepreneur when they took control of his industries. Ultimately, though, Gómez's legacy was instilling his way of ruling the country in every subsequent Venezuelan leader. The Second World War provided a fantastic opportunity for the new president Medina to renegotiate with foreign oil companies. He wrote to President Roosevelt to try and persuade him to help. With Mexico fully nationalizing its oil a few years prior, Roosevelt agreed, and even sent legal advisors to help the Venezuelan government in negotiations. This culminated in the passing of a new oil law in 1943 called the 50-50 Principle, which made the Venezuelan state equal partners in the oil industry, to which they would receive half of the oil profits. There was, however, one problem. Famous lawmaker Juan Pablo Perez Alfonso found after crunching the numbers that this made Venezuela oil less profitable than Middle Eastern oil. Venezuela then sent a delegation to the Middle East with translated versions of the 50-50 principle. Soon after, these nations too adopted similar laws, which had the added benefit of making Venezuela oil lucrative once more. But Venezuela was unprepared for what would happen in the coming decade. Following the Second World War, there was a major increase in the demand for oil. At the same time, the Middle East broke out into geopolitical conflicts, including Egypt closing the Suez Canal and Iran nationalizing its oil industry. The dramatic rise in oil prices made Venezuela the largest recipient of foreign currency that decade. In response to growing public pressure, the government used the excess oil revenue to heavily subsidize gas prices, giving Venezuelans the cheapest gas in the world. But this was not enough. All sections of society started to desire and demand more of the revenue. One such faction was the military, which became the kingmaker in Venezuelan politics for the next several decades. After removing Medina from office, the country was ruled by a civilian junta government. Universal suffrage was enacted, and the first democratic election took place. Ultimately, this was short-lived, when the military again removed the president from office, this time installing another dictator named Perez Jimenez. Jimenez, much like Gómez, ruled with an iron fist. He banned opposition parties, tortured his political enemies, and rigged the 1952 election on the basis that there needed to be a more correct count. Despite this, during his rule, Venezuela was becoming richer by the day. and Western companies started to pour into the country. There were few to no taxes, little to no regulations, and a new population of consumers with pockets stuffed with cash. As long as you didn't get in the way of Jimenez, you were free to do business any way you saw fit. He saw a glimmering future for Venezuela with ungodly amounts of money and nothing standing in his way. Jimenez set forth his grand ambitions. The country was renamed to the Republic of Venezuela. New state-owned heavy industries were created and lofty public work programs were set in motion. Jimenez believed he could buy Venezuela into modernity. New housing was created for the poor, schools opened, hospitals sprung up all over the country, and sprawling new highways started to crisscross the nation. The goal was to impress foreigners with modern infrastructure, fancy hotels, and world-class restaurants. He supplied generous loans to corporations and subsidized their costs. He also poured money into the military to keep them happy. Eventually, the cracks in his ambitions started to reveal themselves. The massive projects were full of waste, corruption, and bribes. The new highways cost exorbitantly more than they should have. The state-owned industries lost money, and the public amenities failed to live up to expectations. However, the nail in the coffin was a lack of living up to his promises to the military. In January 1958, Jimenez's closest military advisors told him to leave, and in a panicked hurry, he departed with his family to the Dominican Republic with suitcases full of cash. By this point, Venezuela's economy and people acted strange. The incredibly overvalued bolivar destroyed most sectors of the economy not adjacent to petroleum. The businesses that still stood were state-run, which were bloated with tens of thousands of employees. Productivity was low, but wages were high. No longer were Venezuelans paid according to their competence. Only the international price of oil mattered. Having a successful business meant that you got lucky. When oil prices were high, businesses did well. Therefore, there was little incentive to work harder. The goal was to try and land an easy, high-paying government position, maybe take some bribes, and try and figure out how to siphon more of the government's oil revenue. Despite massive social spending and financing of state-run corporations designed to provide jobs, the lack of economic diversity meant that a majority of Venezuelans remained unemployed. To combat the political backlash of such a startling unemployment number, food prices were mandated to stay extremely low. This meant that the already struggling agricultural sector was now being squeezed by prices that did not allow them to make profits. The people of Venezuela and their ideas about money started to warp and adapt to such unique circumstances. Venezuela would go on to have its second triad democracy, which was enabled by a pact between the largest political parties. But conditions were just too strange, and oil revenue was just too much. The resulting democracy was untethered from political accountability, since it did not rely on the population for taxes. The president was also given too much unchecked power, and would largely lean authoritarian. And the lust for wealth in an economy that did not foster hard work meant that the political structure became woefully infected by corruption at every level. Despite this, Venezuela continued its rapid economic growth. The subsequent presidents worked to slowly gain more revenue from the oil companies, which ultimately culminated in the creation of OPEC, the first international petroleum cartel in the 60s. No longer were prices and outputs set by the oil companies, but by the nations that yielded the oil. In October 1973, petroleum geopolitics was once again shaken to its core. The West's support of Israel in the Yom Kippur War yielded a total oil embargo from the Arab-producing nations for almost half a year. Oil prices exploded to $14 a gallon. Venezuela started to receive triple the amount of oil profits. The former oil minister Perez Alfonso warned that the $10 billion will crush us. We have a president with a mountain of gold to dispense. Everyone will be thinking how to put his hands in the bag. This mountain of capital was literally too much money for the small country to absorb. Venezuela quickly descended into a state of emergency. Officials feared the overwhelming increase in money would spike inflation to uncontrollable levels. President Perez raised all wages, dumped more money into social spending, and tasked the government with creating jobs anywhere they could. One extreme example of this is every public bathroom and elevator was mandated by law to staff attendants. Inflation nonetheless started to climb rapidly to 12% a year. By 1974, Venezuelans realized that keeping money in banks was the fastest way to lose money. Banks were forced to keep loan rates low. By now, it made more sense to spend money and take take out loans than to save. The middle class in Venezuela grew to a staggering 58% of the population. Almost everyone was thriving more than they ever had been before, yet few understood the house of cards their economy was built on. The government tried to implement a savings fund for excess oil revenue, but it would go on to become the piggy bank for future leaders and never lived up to its created purpose. The government swelled to 300,000 employees, and a law was passed essentially banning companies from firing workers in the wake of higher wages. The largest companies became reliant upon generous state subsidies to remain profitable. Small businesses not receiving state funds quickly bankrupted. Soon, 9% of the largest and artificially swollen businesses were responsible for 75% of all goods produced. The president also made the first step toward nationalizing the oil industry. The new deadline was 1983. Long before this, facing down the realization of nationalization, oil companies ceased investments. The 1980s began Venezuela's death spiral. Oil prices not only normalized, but dramatically decreased by 1988. No one, from the common people to the leaders, stopped to think about what would happen if oil prices dropped. Companies relied on the state. Consumers relied on an overpriced currency, a majority of jobs were unproductive and state-mandated, and now the flow of cash that keeps everyone happy was only a trickle. The political structure made sure that funding was not cut, and thus huge debt started to mount. Under the new president, Luis Campins, foreign debt quadrupled, and he turned to draining the oil fund. The oil industry, now nationalized under the state-run PDVSA, also had its savings taken by the president. The dollar flow that kept the economy running was quickly draining away, and thus Campins dramatically devalued the bolivar on February 18, 1983, known to Venezuelans as Black Friday. Since almost all everyday products were imported, this meant overnight the cost of living became unaffordable. To stop the panic withdrawals of foreign currency, Campins imposed capital controls and created two fixed exchange rates, 4.3 and 6 bolivars per dollar, enforced by a new exchange organization called Recadi. Venezuela had become dependent on the world, but now it could no longer pay the bill. This would continue with oil prices remaining stagnant and low. Inflation ran rampant, and therefore Venezuelans tried to save as little money as possible, as it would lose value by the day. In times of turmoil, and with policies that artificially mess with exchange rates, people turned to corruption, bribing, and the black market more than ever before. Government officials would sell dollars at preferential rates, which could then yield 1,000% return selling on the black market. Price controls on food mean people would buy more than they needed in fear of shortages tomorrow. As scarcity for items grew, yet prices were mandated to stay the same, they would then sell the excess they bought illegally or even smuggle them to sell in neighboring countries. The entire economy in 1989 contracted by 10%. Unlike the promises he gave in his campaign, Perez enacted dramatic and harsh economic policies all at once in an effort to halt economic collapse. He stopped paying debts, abolished Recadi, lifted price controls, rose gas prices, and cut social spending. Almost instantly, the currency lost 60% of its value, and gas prices doubled. Violent protests erupted, and by the end, hundreds of lives were lost when the military put them down. From 1981 to 1989, the percentage of Venezuelans living in poverty increased by over tenfold. It finally became apparent to Venezuelans just how unbelievably corrupt the government had become. Former presidents had been charged with embezzling money, and foreign companies had benefited generously from bribing Recadi. They didn't understand the economic importance of saving and investing oil wealth. As far as they were concerned, life was better under strongman dictators. This is why in February 1992, the people cheered when a mysterious paratrooper attempted a socialist military takeover of their democratically elected government. The 1999 coup didn't work. The paratrooper and leader of the attempt, Hugo Chaves, was arrested, but to the poor he was a hero in the face of anti-corruption. Under the next president, he was freed. Over the next 6 years, Venezuela's economic turmoil would worsen. Due to a lack of regulation, a banking crisis occurred, in which 11% of its GDP was wiped out, and inflation topped 100%. The demand for change permeated society, and Chaves became a rising political star. He was elected in 1998 on a mandate to fix the wrongs of decades of corruption. Chaves, who was born into poverty, rose the ranks of the military in the campaign against leftist guerrilla fighters in the 70s. During his military career, however, he developed leftist sympathies and created a secret organization with other military officers who believed Venezuela needed a socialist government. By the time he was elected, almost half of all Venezuelans lived in poverty. Corruption ran rampant, and inequality was greater than it ever had been before. Chaves claimed to believe in democracy, and during his campaign, he promised to respect private property. At the same time, however, he had grown an appreciation of Fidel Castro and socialist Cuba, even hosting the dictator's 75th birthday party. Desperate for something new, voters gave Chaves the green light to rewrite the constitution, in which a new Congress was created and filled with Chaves' allies. He renamed the country to the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela and enacted what he called the Bolivarian Revolution. In 2001, he enacted 49 new laws, giving the state the power to seize land and break up large agricultural plots. He also enacted a new petroleum law setting the stage for a greater state role in running the oil industry. PDVSA, while state-owned, ran largely independent of the political structure. In an effort to attract desperately needed capital and expertise, the company opened its doors to foreign companies and in doing so supplied generous terms. In essence, while state-run, the oil in Venezuela was still largely controlled by foreign forces, in what critics called a disguised privatization. However, the effect was beneficial to Venezuela, as it had dramatically increased oil output since its lull after nationalization. PDVSA's political independence made it a well-functioning, for-profit oil corporation that actively tried to minimize its payments to the government. Chaves didn't like this. He appointed loyalists to the company's board, including those who had no experience in the oil industry. Employees protested the government's intrusion in the company, and eventually a coup was led against Chaves. He was unseated for just 2 days, but thousands of PDVSA employees declared a total strike and oil production ceased for 2 entire months, losing the country billions in revenue. Chaves doubled down, fired almost 20,000 employees, and labeled them and their supporters enemies of the state. The public, in panic about the dramatic slowdown in oil exports, sought to convert their bolivars into other currencies. Chaves reinstituted exchange controls and created Cadivi, which is similar to Ricati. To stop rampant inflation, he enacted price controls and forced banks to supply cheap loans to key industries and ordinary people. Once again, with high inflation and cheap loans, Venezuelans took to spending and taking out loans, but the situation soon stabilized. Unlike what happened in the 80s, booming oil prices returned in the 2000s. The rapidly developing countries like China started to demand giant quantities of commodities from iron to copper to oil. By 2008, the price of oil had increased by 600%. The lessons of the 50s and the 70s were either ignored or forgotten by Chaves. Instead of saving excess oil revenues for when oil prices dropped, he used the booming oil markets to finance his socialist agenda. He instituted massive social programs called missions, subsidized food, housing, and jobs for the poor, and also brought in thousands of doctors from Cuba. Imports became cheap again, and the money once again flowed. For Venezuelans, all they knew or cared about was that their quality of life had dramatically improved under Chaves. They started buying luxury goods again, drove Western cars, and filled their tanks of gas with pocket change. The good old days of the 70s had returned, but Chaves continued his own mission to develop what he called 21st Century Socialism. One by one, he started nationalizing the major industries and increased taxes on foreign companies. He then declared his economic war on savage neoliberal capitalists. The economic turmoils of the past were not due to oil revenue mismanagement, but the evils of foreign capitalism. Inflation was not a basic principle of economics, but an attempt by the others who sought to extract wealth from the people of Venezuela. By the death of Chaves, Venezuela maintained the most revenue from oil extracted by any government in the world. 90% of the profit from every barrel of oil was given to the state. How Venezuela spent that money was never the decision nor the care of foreign oil companies. The booming economy under Chaves, as well as the previous leaders, was never about their policies. It was about the current price of oil. Chaves did not save any oil revenue. He continued to create bloated and inefficient government-owned companies. He did not invest in productivity-boosting economic policies, and his goal of fixing the agricultural sector failed. He restricted the flow of dollars, and this enabled backdoor black market trading. If a foreigner bought bolivars at the official exchange rate, hotels would cost in excess of $2,000 a night. If they do the same trade on the black market, it would cost them as low as $50. To allow Venezuelans to travel abroad, they were allowed to exchange bolivars for 2,000 USD once a year. Once in a foreign country, they kept whatever they did not use on the flight. They smuggled the rest back home and then sold it on the black market. In doing so, they could make 7 times the yearly minimum wage salary. Having lived for generations in such a backwards economy, Venezuelans now have a warped sense of money and economics. With inflation topping 100, 300, 10,000%, they quickly take out loans and buy anything they can. By the time the loan payments are due, they would cost a tiny fraction of what they would have originally. When food is scarce, they buy satellite TVs and electronics. When those run out, Venezuelans turn to cosmetic surgery. When money becomes valueless, looking beautiful becomes a smart investment. But then the crisis happened. In 2008, oil prices dipped and then plummeted in 2014. Venezuela was once again unable to import the food, materials, and other resources it did not produce. It had not saved money like Saudi Arabia, Russia, and Norway had. Its economy was not diversified for productivity, and it did not grow enough food to feed itself. Venezuela's economy has crumbled. Millions have fled the country, and most are starving. By 2019, inflation had reached 65,000%. The total drop in its economy makes it the largest such in modern history. The successor to Chaves was Maduro, who currently leads the country. He largely follows Chaves' principles and has been slowly chipping away at what is left of democracy. In the meantime, the Venezuelan people are suffering more than they had before oil. Venezuela, more than anything, is a reminder that too much money spent incorrectly is worse than having no money at all. Remember to click the link in my description to start your free 7-day trial with Blinkist and get 25% off a premium membership. Thank you, Blinkist, for sponsoring this video.